So you're thinking about writing a backstory for your character. Well, you're in luck, because behind today's secret door, how to handle backstories. So behind today's Secret Door, how to handle backstories. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussion about Dungeons and Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. Well, before I get started, let me just say I have started a Patreon if you're interested in supporting the channel. The link will be in the description and the pinned comment and would be much appreciated and much needed. So writing a backstory can be a really daunting thing, and it seems that both DMs and players get drawn to this like a moth to a fire. I have often had DMs over my playing career who incentivized players to write a backstory by granting them experience points if they did it. And so, naturally, being every bit the power gamer that I am, I was very quick to write backstories. But the thing was, they didn't need to offer me experience to do something like that, because as much as I am a power gamer, optimizer, whatever phrase you want to use, I am every bit as much a role player. So it wasn't a big ask for me to write a backstory for my characters. So for me, it was always an easy thing to do. But for a lot of people, it can be a little tricky. And from what I've observed, people get caught up in different kinds of traps. So this video is really designed to help you answer the question of, do you actually need to write a backstory for your character? And if you do, the ways that at least I think would be the most productive ways to write a backstory. If you're a DM watching this, it may also be a productive way to guide your players into the kinds of things, into writing an effective backstory. So what do I mean by an effective backstory? Most players, when they approach their backstory, are wanting to treat it like an origin story in a comic book. This is how I became an adventurer. This is how it all got started. Da-da-da-da-da. Well, first of all, from my point of view, as a lifelong comic book fan, the worst story you could tell is an origin story. They're boring. We're already interested in the character. I don't understand why in movies they feel compelled to give the origin story when we already know who the character is. That's why we're going to the movie. In D&D, it's very much the same thing, because you are obviously going to be an adventurer. You're obviously playing at the table. So you don't need to tell us why. You don't even need to have a really good answer as to why you're an adventurer. What you want to do with a backstory is to create a possible repository of things to draw from that you will be able to use in play. So when I hear a lot of people's backstories over the years, the origin ones and the grand sweeping epic ones are kind of the same ones. So a lot of backstories will fall into the trap of telling all these great epic things that the character did before they ever got started. But the problem with that is, in most cases, you're starting out at level 1. So if you already did all these great and cool things, you fought in the 7 wars and you killed this guy and you destroyed this kingdom and blah, 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 blah. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're a first level character. How did you do all that and be a first level character? So the trap that a player is doing when they write that is that they are writing the character that they want to be, but that's still to be determined in play. What you want the backstory to do is to reinforce what you want the character to be in a realistic way that has harmony with the game world that you're living in. If you want to write something like a backstory that's similar to the writing the epic thing, just for yourself, write a little scene or something of how you envision the character becoming. If the DM is interested in that, you can give them that as well, because it'll give the DM insight as to what kind of character it is you intend to play. That's useful for the DM. So the backstory isn't just helpful for the player. If the DM is actually going to read the backstory, it can be effective for the DM to see what the player is intending to play, or what the player has in mind, and what the player might be handing to the DM to use in future adventures or weave into the campaign. So in essence, all I'm really saying to avoid is make things smaller. Don't go for big, grand things in your backstory. Make them small. And this is where I'll get into what an effective backstory can be. So I would approach a backstory these days maybe as nothing more than just a family history, or not so much a big family history, but just an idea of how you grew up. What were your siblings' names? What were your parents' names? What did your parents do? How did you and your siblings interact? What kinds of dynamics were going on with you and your siblings, or with your parents, or whatever, that helped shape your character? What were the grandparents or uncles or aunts or whoever, or neighbors, or whoever influenced your character in their early life is going to be useful in play. You'll be able to reference those points. Simply having the names of those characters readily available to you will allow you to reference them in play. Now, I'm not suggesting that you reference them in play all the time or anything like that. This is simply something to very gently sprinkle in throughout the course of the campaign that you might reference these characters. Now, having said that, a lot of D&D characters don't have any connection with loved ones at all. They want to be this iconic action hero kind of character. And that's perfectly okay. Those are really fun characters to play. So nothing in what I'm saying here, don't get me wrong, am I saying that this is the right way and this is the wrong way, this is better than that? Not at all. I'm simply trying to give you ideas that are going to be actually practically useful when you're playing. Playing the great action hero, a lot of my characters, that's pretty much the template that they've been under. Now, I don't typically write backstories. I have, but some of my most memorable, my funnest, my greatest, my most cherished characters over the years, I never wrote a backstory. Sometimes when you're dealing with wanting to play an iconic kind of character, that's all that matters. The attitude, the sense of, it could be swagger, it could be arrogance, it could be bombasticness, it could be any of those things. Memorable D&D characters are very different than fully fleshed out characters in a novel or an in-depth character study in a movie. A very effective and memorable D&D character can simply be an entertaining affectation. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be a lot of depth and soul into a character. I've had characters that had that to spare. And if you end up ever having the great experience of playing in a solo game, this is where those kind of characters can really shine. But if you're playing in a group, having a character dripping with pathos is hard to play. And especially the larger the group is, the more difficult that is to play. Not saying you can't do it, and I'm not saying that in a big group you can't play a fully fleshed out, rounded out character with a lot of depth. Of course you can, and you should strive for that if that's what you want to do. But there's no right or wrong way to approach a character. Like I said, a perfectly effective, memorable character that you'll be able to think back on fondly could simply be a character that had an entertaining affectation. For these kinds of characters, you don't really need that much of a backstory. This is all about attitude. It's about you'll have more to it, of course, and you'll add to it as time goes by. And the more talent you have as a role player or as an entertainer, then you'll be able to adapt and grow that character from that first idea and let it grow. But it doesn't even have to grow at all. It can stay that character throughout the course of the campaign. This isn't literature. This is Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role-playing game, and we're having fun. What's important with a character like that is that as long as you are committed to that character, if it is that iconic kind of character, that you have the idea of what the character will and won't do, then you're an effective role-playing character. And in these kinds of cases, backstories are not that terribly useful. They could actually even be counterproductive because you could be popping the balloon before you ever get to actually play. Often the simple things, if we try and analyze them or force them, get ruined. So if you're playing that kind of a simple idea, and I don't say simple is a pejorative. Simple is great. Simple is hard to pull off. So if you can do that, if that's what you're wanting to play, then you don't need to really worry about a backstory. But if you're playing something else, if you're playing something that's like, let's take a character that is not really iconic, even though it's kind of become iconic, something like a Bilbo Baggins, if you were to play that kind of a character, well, that's a character where we know a little bit about Bilbo's life and history and that type of thing. So in that sense, I think that making a family bio for that kind of a character is going to be very, very useful. Now, within that kind of a family history approach, you can still weave in a lot of things that players want to weave in. So if you want to create the great trauma that set your character off into the path of adventuring, like, so let's say your family was a family of farmers and you really want to have that big idea of why you became an adventurer and you wanted to do the kind of revenge story, well, you can plant that into the bio, of course, and you probably need to. Revenge is a really common one, and it's a very powerful motivation for a character. The problem with going with things like that is that theoretically the DM might think that you want to realize that within the campaign. And if you do realize it, and meaning you satisfy the revenge, now what? What does that character do? That itself can be a really interesting question. Once this revenge has been sated, now what? But you're creating a kind of trap for yourself with the revenge story. But that being said, that's a great motivation, and they make some of the greatest characters that you read about that inspire you are revenge stories. The grizzled veteran kind of story, that's another common one. I'm alluding to that with the big epic stories battles that you have done. If you're wanting to play the grizzled character, you have to find a way that makes sense of how you can create that war-weary character and start at first level. Now, if you're in a campaign that's starting at a higher level, that makes things a lot easier. But if you are starting at first level, you're going to have to come up with some kind of rationale for it. I would say if you're wanting the character that's already seen a lot and done a lot, scale that back as much as you can to still get that effect. Don't make it so much quantity that you went through. Maybe it was simply something really profound that you witnessed, or that you witnessed through a loved one. Like you had an uncle that had gone through all these other great things that you're wanting to write about for your character, and they informed you about these things. And then something traumatic and dramatic happened in relation to that allowed you to connect to these ideas and see the truth of it. I'm not here to try and tell you how to write every little thing about your backstory, of course. Simply, I'm just trying to tickle your imagination a little bit as to how to approach one, because I've seen a lot of these kind of things get repeated over and over again. So this is my other real big point for writing an effective backstory is with 5th edition, we get the addition of ideals, bonds, and flaws. Writing your backstory, focusing your backstory on those ideas is really useful. How did all of those form? What were the ingredients that created that? A lot of this could simply be who you are in relationship to your family, and what kind of lessons your family taught you. But there could be obviously other things that you might have started off as a very different person, and then later on in your formative years, something happened that changed those things, and now your ideal is this, and now your bonds and flaws are this. This will give you a lot of kind of texture and meat to those ideas so that when they come up in play, they're going to be more poignant to you. They're not just going to be, oh, I'm going to take this, this, and this. They're going to have their own identity because you've given them one. Writing backstories in a context of things that you did prior to adventuring is really nothing more than just a resume. And a resume doesn't really tell us anything about who you are. And that's really what the backstory is for. It's what the DM's wanting. If they're inviting you to write one, that's what they want to see. And that's what you want to be. You want to be this character, whether it's an iconic character or it's a character with a set of complex gears that are moving them, and a rich family life or history or whatever that motivates them. Either of these is perfectly, one is just as good as the other and can be just as powerful as the other. But if you are writing your backstory, in either case, work on those ideas and it will give them the depth that will give you something, a place to stand and be able to improvise in the moment because you'll already have a little bit of material already there. And don't ever think that improv is just always just pulled right out of the air. That's not true. People who are really good at improv have a lot of stock ideas that they are just pulling out, material that they've built up over the years. And they might, on the spot, spin it and change it, but they've got it there. That's what your backstory can do for you as a player. If you create just the skeletal resume, then that's what it's what you're going to get is a skeleton with no flesh on it. You want that flesh. You want it to be alive. You want to feel that you are connected to this character. The easiest way to do that's going to come up into play is by focusing on the ideals, bonds, and flaws. You certainly don't have to, but that's going to be the easiest way to approach it. And then if you want to develop that further, of course you can. So let me just kind of finish up with this kind of an idea. I find this kind of an amusing idea because it's so true. In play, if you were to write the backstory of all the great sweeping things that your character has already done, and you were to try and bring that up in practical play to the other players at the table, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to care or be impressed or anything. I mean, they might act like they are as the characters. They might. But the players aren't going to be. They're not going to be moved or wowed or anything like that. It's not going to do anything for the game. But if you bring up that your grandma's apple turnover recipe also served as an aphrodisiac, well, that might be remembered. That might be a delightful little thing that is brought into the campaign that people will reference and they'll remember. So which backstory is more effective? So that's really the ultimate point. When you're approaching your backstory, don't feel trapped into feeling like you have to create the great character fully drawn up and all these type of things. Get down into the basic ideas of what's going to help you play that character. And once that starts happening, you're not even going to need to think so much about the backstory. It will integrate itself into you. And that's where the role-playing blooms and is just a joy. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.